Welcome to the Magalia Rose Studio. I hope you enjoy our step-by-step demonstration video and that you use the ideas and techniques that are presented and utilize them to inspire you to create your own unique artwork. I would like to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Kathy, and I've had the wonderful opportunity to teach watercolor classes to beginning through advanced students for over 10 years. My teaching philosophy is not to teach my style, but to present ideas and techniques through step-by-step painting demonstrations that let you find your own style. I believe everyone is an artist and that it is not determined by age, gender, innate talent, or technical instruction. Being an artist requires the willingness to quiet the negative voices from within and without ourselves, and to enjoy the process and challenge of creating something entirely ours. Let's see what today's demonstration painting will present. The demonstration painting of a blue iris is rather tame, and I hope that you will take the techniques that we used to create this one to make wild irises of your imagination, using a variety of colors and even a composition that might be a little unusual. This is the fun of creating your own original artwork. The supplies you're going to need for the iris painting are very simple and very basic. You're first going to need either a sketch or a template of your irises. I sometimes have these available on my website, magaliarose.com. You can check. Sometimes I have to take them down to make room for other projects. This particular painting is done on 1/8 of a sheet of watercolor paper, cold press, 140 pound. This would equal to about a 7.5 by 11 inches. I suggest you use professional quality watercolor paper. It'll enhance your opportunities to use some of the techniques most successfully. I usually have a support board that is simply foam core covered with packing tape on which I can place my watercolor paper. I then tape my paper down. I do this because I lift and move my paper quite a bit, and this keeps things from shifting and sliding off. I suggest a paper towel or cloth nearby to dry your brush, to adjust the liquid on it, the water. I have a little small traveling palette here. You don't have to have anything fancy. Sometimes even a paper plate will work just fine. The colors I'm using today are cerulean blue, indigo, and Hansa yellow or lemon yellow. This is a very limited palette, but gives you a good opportunity to mix colors and see what a little can do a lot. Two brushes that I use for the entire painting are a number 8 round brush and a 3/4 inch flat brush. You will need a pencil to transfer your drawing to the watercolor paper, the simple number 2 pencil. I always have a piece of test paper nearby to test my color and the value. In this particular painting, I've used some instant tea. This is regular instant tea with no sweetener, sugar, or lemon added. It can come in handy for a lot of other little projects. And finally, 2 containers I recommend clear so that you can see how dirty the water might be. One is to rinse your brush, and one is to mix your colors with. With these simple things, you'll be ready to start the painting. Let's paint. I have my template already onto my watercolor paper, and I've taped it down. The reason I tape it down is because I usually pick up my paper quite often, move the water around, and get the colors to move. So this is something that's optional, but make sure that the tape is down fairly firmly, and you have the option of it not sliding or slipping. The next choice you're going to have is the background. Some people sort of plan it, what should I do? My background first or my main element first? This is usually the matter of the painting and the painter's preference, but in this particular painting of the iris and the foliage, I want to go ahead and put the background in first. The reason is that by the time I do all the work on the irises, I don't want to mistake in the background to pretty much put the painting into jeopardy as being a success. The colors I'm going to use are my Hansa yellow and my cerulean blue. I'm going to activate both those colors with a little bit of water. And my approach is going to be a wet into wet, which simply means the paper will have clear water applied to it before I put on the colors. And they're going to be very light. A very light value, just a sort of a hint of color would be the best, so it would be very diluted with lots of water. My pattern is not simply going to be one color down at the bottom and going up, let's say my blue down to my yellow, because the yellow and blue at a certain point are going to mix and make green. But I want to have this at a diagonal for interest, for the composition, and just my preference, but you can do it any way you would like. So the first step is going to be to paint just clear water onto the background, avoiding for the most part the leaves and the blossoms of the iris. But if a little runs over, a little of that clear water runs over, it's not going to cause a problem because we're using similar colors. In fact, we're using the exact colors in this case. And they will simply add another layer of glazing and interest. So don't overstress the fact that the water might go into areas that you hadn't originally planned. But I'm using a flat 3/4 inch brush, which is my preference for getting into sharp little areas. But any type of a round or flat brush that you have, or an angle brush, will work just fine. You're applying a fair amount of water. You should see it's somewhat of a glossy look for the most part. Where it starts to dry, it'll look a little more like satin, a little more of a matte finish, and that's okay in this case. We just need to make sure that the paper is getting a lot of water on it before we apply those colors. Don't forget all those little areas in between. Okay, that looks pretty good. My color's been activated and I'm going to add quite a bit of water to my little palette here. And first I'm going to go with my lightest color, which is the Hansa yellow or lemon yellow. Always test your colors first on a little piece of extra paper. And that looks about right. So I'm going to go ahead and, again with my diagonal, I'm going to start up here and just gently brush in that yellow, because again we just want a hint, nothing too dramatic. And now I'm going to go ahead and speed up our little demonstration so you don't have to watch the whole process. I've taken a moment and used a commercial hairdryer to dry the background of the painting. This can speed things up so that you can get to the more interesting parts of your painting, but be sure that the background or whatever else you've used the hairdryer on is completely dry. The easiest way to do that is to use the back of your hand. Don't use your fingertips. They oftentimes have oils on them that can interfere with the paint, but use the back of your hand. And if it doesn't feel cool, if it feels room temperature or so, then it is fine to paint on. We're now going to begin on the blossoms, and I have chosen cerulean blue and indigo for the colors I'm going to use on these blossoms. I'm going to use clear water and simply dampen the inside area of a couple of the blossoms with just the clear water. And now I'm going to put put a little dab of cerulean blue onto my brush, and this is a number 8 round, and I'm going to come into these areas at the edge, working into that area of water so that that center part will be a little lighter, catching some light maybe from the background, because we know how thin and translucent those beautiful petals can be. Now while that's still very wet, I'm going to just take a little tiny bit of indigo, and I'm going to come into the bottom and just drop that in. Don't brush, just use that tip and gently allow that indigo to move along with the cerulean blue. But leave that beautiful interior. This is when I like to see the paint move. Again, a little bit of the cerulean blue, just on the outer edges, letting it move into that center wet area. That's the charm of watercolor. Let the water do the work. Don't worry about covering every single inch either. A few little white areas can add more interest to the painting rather than just being obsessed with getting every little edge done. Now I'm going to go ahead and speed the process up on the blossom since you have the basic idea. Again, wet the center with some clear water. Take your lighter blue, whatever you've chosen, in this case cerulean blue, and drop it in gently. Don't brush hard. And while still very wet, take a little of your darker color, in this case indigo, and just barely touch it to that wet area of cerulean blue and let the paint run. Now I'm going to move on to the petals of the other blossom over here, and I'm going to use the very same technique as I did on the original. I'm going to take some clear water and paint in the center area of the petal. Whatever blue you're using, lighter blue, in this case I'm using again cerulean, and I'm just going to gently bring that into the wet area from the edges, letting the water diffuse it and move it in a little bit of a spontaneous manner. A little bit of the indigo dropped into the first in these toward the center or shadow areas. If you need a little bit more water, that's just fine. Some people get a little concerned when they see their pencil marks still showing. This is a very common part of watercolor. Do not be upset if some of the pencil lines continue to show even after the painting's done. Become an observer of other watercolor painting and artists, and you will see some very interesting things, that preconceived notions that might be incorrect when you start really realizing what you're admiring in a watercolor piece. which often is the very spontaneity and the definition offered by a few of those lines. I'm going to pick up the board a little bit and have some of this movement that I'm really enjoying right in this area. I'm going to go ahead and speed this up again and finish this second blossom. Now we have completed the two main blossoms. One little hint I'd like to offer to you is as you do a certain area and you find that maybe your colors are bleeding more than you had wanted, leave a little area of white in between them. You can either leave this in the end when your painting is completed, or you can fill it in after it is dried. But this will be something that you will decide on later. But it will prevent the blossoms from all running into one blossom. We do have these immature blossoms, two of these down here, and I'm going to do these in about the same way as we did the full petals. I'm going to take clear water and I'm going to come into the center of this area. I'm not going to do too much other than just the edge of that one. Bring in the cerulean. And again, I'm not brushing, I'm just simply dabbing it in there gently. Indigo. And that's about all I'm going to do on that one. Remember that this area in here is going to be green because it's holding the blossom that's going to become a full flower. The other one is in the same technique. Water. A little of the cerulean. And now the indigo for shadow areas. I'm going to add a little more indigo down here because a lot of it just didn't happen the way I wanted it to. You might want to take just a touch of that original Hansel lemon yellow and just drop it in so that it creates a green that would indicate the immaturity of that blossom. It hasn't brought on its full color yet. And now we can let that dry. Now that the blossoms have been painted, both the unfolded blossoms and the newer blossoms, let's move on to the foliage. I've mixed a combination of my Hansa yellow lemon and my indigo into a green. I've left some lighter green on one side and darker on the other. This is so that I have everything I need, not making everything the same value of green. A little fun thing to do if you have it available is I often, while the paint is wet on certain foliage, use a little instant tea. This is a regular instant tea that has no sweetener, sugar, or lemon added, just the tea. And when the surface of the leaf is wet, I sprinkle a little bit of that on, let it dry and stay, and it adds a little bit of a natural look to foliage and some other things such as landscapes. I'm going to begin by taking this green and I'm going to start at the base of the leaf where the darkest color will be and just simply brush it on. a little darker where it meets the other leaf, and there might be a shadow. And then continuing up that spear-like leaf of the iris. And it gets lighter and lighter as I pull the paint up. If I want it a little darker where the leaf might cast a shadow from that blossom, I'll just drop in a little bit of that darker green. If I want to get into an extremely heavy shadow, I can just take a little bit of straight indigo and brush that onto it while the paint is wet. Let it run. And now I'm going to sprinkle a bit of instant tea in there, not a lot, and sort of make it very light. Okay. Now I'm going to move on to the next leaf. I'm going to start it a little darker and leave that little bit of white between them. It's always enjoyable to watch the paint run with watercolors. I think was the hardest thing for me to get used to when I transferred from oil and acrylic painting to watercolor, was that the paint seemed to move and go where it wanted to go. And it sometimes was a little frustrating for me in the beginning. There comes a point where you can simply let it go. And I'm going to add a little shadow in here. And if you get too much dark, simply dry off your brush a little bit and pick up some of the darker color you may not want. And I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of tea in that area while it's nice and wet. If the tea jumps into some place you don't want, just blow it off and it'll leave right away. Now I've reached the point where I am going to have a stem, and I'm going to treat the stem just like I did those leaves. I'm going to come in, start with applying the color where I want it the darkest, the richest, and that's actually under those petals where they will cast a shadow. I'm going to skip below this blossom and its stem and continue the stem of the large opened blossom. I'm not going to apply any tea to the stems. They're just going to stand the way they are, even a hair darker than some of the leaves. Now I'm going to approach this blossom. And the darkest green will probably be within this fold. I can put a little indigo in there. Pull it up a little bit. There we go. Now I'll take some of the lighter green and have that wrap around here. Sort of a spring green almost right here. And sort of mid yellow green in here. This little area here is going to be very dark. It's a little fold. And I'm going to let it just bleed a little tiny bit. Now as I complete the stems and the other leaves, I'm going to speed that up a bit because you don't have to go step by step. You have the basic idea of how we're going to do this, and let's go ahead and finish with that foliage. Now that the painting is pretty well blocked in, you've put in the background, you have the blossoms and the foliage. This is the time we're going to start looking at details. These are simply areas where you might want a little shading or a little changing. For example, I would want to look a little more like ruffles on those flowers. As we know, irises tend to have that lacy, ruffly edge to them, and that's easily obtained by using a little bit of the indigo, and very, very light. Don't get too dark here. And adding a few simple lines. These will be shadows of the ruffles. If they go on dark, rinse your brush and then gently pull them out. And you're beginning to see little ruffles, little irregularities in those edges. They're not always straight. And don't overdo it. A few will give the hint to any viewer. They're going to know exactly what that iris looks like, so they don't need to have too much direction from you. And you can continue doing these on a few of the blossoms. As far as your immature blossoms, again, if you want to add a little tiny bit of shadow against that image, that is your option. If you don't want a hard line, just soften it like that. I'm going to add that little beard of yellow here for the bearded iris. And that will bring that blossom to life. If your stem needs a light and a dark side, you're going to return to your green. And again, and add a little bit of the shadow on that side. So go ahead and continue on with those detail work, and we'll return when I think mine's about ready for the final stage, what I call the dance. Now I've added a few more details, adding a few little marks to indicate ruffles in the blossoms. I've darkened the shadow side and the base of the foliage so that it somewhat grounds the painting. It lets you know that things are more shadowed down there. And at this point I call it the dance, and this is something only you can decide when the painting is completed. That is a question I'm often asked. Is it done? You're going to have to decide that. And my suggestions are, number one, put some type of a frame around it if possible, even if all you have are some blank pieces of paper that you can just frame it out and get rid of that distracting background. Be sure to set the painting some distance away from you. Being too close while we're painting can sometimes distort what we're seeing. So set it at least 4 to 6 feet away from you in different locations, perhaps in your house, so that you can better understand different lighting and how it's going to affect the painting. When the moment comes that you say, it is done, you can remove it from the board, you can mat it, possibly frame it, and share it with those around you. Let's see what this is going to look like in a few moments if I can find a good mat for it. I found a simple mat in my supply cabinet, and now my painting is ready to frame. I hope you've enjoyed painting with me and that a few of the tips have been valuable to you. And I hope to see you at our next video. Until then, keep painting.